The first light of dawn struggled to pierce the dense fog over the cliffs of Normandy. The coastline lay silent, almost deceptively calm, while the waters of the English Channel shimmered gray under the early morning sky. From his reinforced observation post, Oberleutnant Karl Müller scanned the horizon with his binoculars, his hands tense, knuckles white. At first, he thought it was another routine patrol, until the sheer immensity of the sight stopped him cold. More than 7,000 Allied ships stretched from horizon to horizon, a seemingly endless armada advancing with meticulous precision. Each vessel bristled with soldiers, tanks, and artillery, a human river of steel and determination heading directly toward the fortified German coastline. For a man who had trained for decades in warfare, who had meticulously studied enemy movements, and who had faced countless skirmishes, the scene was staggering. The scale alone was unthinkable, almost cinematic, and yet it was terrifyingly real. Karl's mind raced, trying to reconcile what he saw with the theories of military science he had known since his academy days. How could any defensive line withstand such a tide? How could any plan, no matter how clever, stop this unstoppable force? The beaches below were not yet alive with the chaos of battle, but the first volleys of naval bombardment began to echo across the cliffs. German soldiers scrambled to their positions, shouting orders and coordinating fire, but even the most confident officers could sense the gravity of the moment. Each gunner knew that any mistake could be fatal. Every bunker represented both a line of defense and a potential tomb. The fog of war was literal and metaphorical, obscuring the horizon while casting an ominous shadow over the human drama unfolding. As Karl adjusted his binoculars, he noticed patterns in the chaos, not in the Germans' defenses, but in the Allied approach. Landing crafts moved with eerie synchrony, their commanders communicating invisibly across the waves. Paratroopers, barely visible against the rising sun, descended behind German lines, poised to disrupt communication and command. It was more than an invasion. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of strategy, logistics, and human courage. And from his vantage point, Karl could see it all unfolding in real time, a living testament to planning that bordered on obsession. Yet even amid the fear and awe, an unsettling realization took root in Karl's mind. The invasion was not just overwhelming, it was inevitable. Every tactic the Germans had rehearsed, every calculation they had made, seemed destined to fail against this unprecedented coordination. The officer had spent years preparing for such a confrontation, yet nothing in textbooks, exercises, or simulations could have prepared him for the sight of thousands of vessels advancing as one unstoppable entity. The tension was almost unbearable. Waves of soldiers waited in the landing crafts, tensely gripping their weapons, eyes fixed on the shore that represented both destiny and death. The first explosions signaled the beginning of the assault. Sand and steel erupted into the air as shells struck bunkers, ripping apart obstacles and scattering defenders. Karl's heart pounded, his training battling against the instinctive fear that gripped him. Amid the chaos, a question echoed in his mind, and in the minds of countless German officers watching from the cliffs that day. How did the Allies amass such force? How did they coordinate with such precision? Could anything at all, stop what was coming? This is the story of that day. A story not just of numbers and strategy, but of human courage, fear, and innovation. It is a tale of Oberleutnant Müller's witness to history, of soldiers on both sides grappling with the extraordinary, and of a single day that would alter the course of the Second World War forever. As the first troops hit the sand, as the first bunkers were destroyed, and as the horizon continued to fill with the relentless surge of Allied ships, one truth became chillingly clear. D-Day was unstoppable, and the world was about to change. The storm clouds of war had been gathering over Europe for years, and by 1944 the Allied command knew that a decisive strike on German-occupied Western Europe was inevitable. The Atlantic Wall, a network of fortifications stretching from Norway to the French coast, had been painstakingly constructed under the guidance of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, who believed that any invading force would meet annihilation before reaching the beaches. Concrete bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, mines, and artillery emplacements created a nearly impregnable line, at least on paper. The Allies faced a monumental challenge. Years of intelligence gathering, reconnaissance, and strategic planning revealed the scale of the German defenses, but also the opportunity. The Germans had concentrated their firepower on predictable invasion points, leaving gaps and weaknesses elsewhere. This understanding formed the backbone of the most ambitious amphibious assault in history. The operation would demand precision, deception, and innovation on a scale never before seen. At the center of the Allied effort stood General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Eisenhower's vision was audacious, an invasion that combined air, land, and sea forces in perfect coordination, supported by an unprecedented logistical apparatus. Each landing craft, each paratrooper, and every ton of equipment was part of a meticulously calculated plan. Yet uncertainty loomed over every decision. Weather, terrain, and enemy reaction could all turn success into catastrophe in an instant. Naval forces, commanded by Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, were tasked with transporting and protecting over 156,000 troops across the Channel. Specialized landing craft, capable of delivering men, vehicles, and artillery directly onto beaches, were developed for the operation. Tanks were modified to overcome obstacles, amphibious vehicles were adapted to handle sand and surf, and Hobart's funnies, ingenious armored machines, would breach fortifications and clear paths for infantry. Every piece of equipment had been tested, every maneuver rehearsed, yet the uncertainty of combat remained omnipresent. Air superiority was equally vital. Allied pilots, flying bombers, fighters, and reconnaissance planes sought to cripple German communication lines, disrupt reinforcements, and provide cover for the amphibious forces. Spies and resistance fighters within France provided vital intelligence, mapping defensive positions and guiding bombing raids. The Germans, relying on radar, entrenched fortifications, and seasoned officers, prepared for predictable attacks. Yet the Allies were determined to confound expectations. Meanwhile, German commanders, such as Rommel and Oberleutnant Wilhelm Richter, understood that the upcoming confrontation would test the limits of their strategic acumen. Rommel, wary of the Allies' deception campaigns, personally inspected fortifications along the Normandy coastline. He strengthened bunkers, deployed anti-landing obstacles, and drilled troops for rapid counterattacks. Yet even Rommel recognized a critical vulnerability. The Germans could not predict the exact location of the assault, and their mobile reserves were limited. On the Allied side, innovation extended beyond brute force. Operations like Fortitude North and South, designed to mislead German intelligence, convinced Hitler's generals that the primary landing would occur at Pas de Calais, diverting troops away from Normandy. Paratroopers trained to land behind enemy lines, sabotage railways, and seize key positions before the main force arrived. Engineers designed artificial harbors, mulberry harbors, to allow supply ships to unload safely even under fire. Each element was part of a delicate web of timing, deception, and daring ingenuity. The stage was set. The Germans believed in the invincibility of their fortifications. The Allies relied on planning, precision, and the element of surprise. The tension, palpable across both sides, was a testament to the stakes. Soldiers, officers, and pilots prepared for a battle that would demand courage, ingenuity, and endurance beyond any previous human endeavor. Every man understood that history itself was unfolding, and that failure would carry consequences far beyond the battlefield. From the vantage points along the cliffs, German observers like Oberleutnant Karl Müller would soon witness a spectacle that defied logic, overwhelmed defenses, and redefined warfare. The Allies' invasion was more than a military maneuver. It was a test of human coordination, strategy, and sheer audacity. And on the morning of June 6, 1944, all that preparation would collide with reality, forever changing the course of the Second World War. The morning of June 6, 1944, was unlike any other in the memory of German officers stationed along the Normandy coast. For weeks, warnings and intelligence reports had hinted at an Allied invasion, but the exact location remained shrouded in uncertainty. Mistaking feints for real attacks, German command struggled to position reserves effectively. Officers shouted orders into the foggy air, relaying instructions that were often delayed or misinterpreted. Chaos and tension mounted, and the carefully planned defenses began to show cracks. From his observation post on Pointe du Hoc, Oberleutnant Karl Müller could see the first waves of Allied landing craft breaking through the channel's gray waters. The tide of ships seemed endless. As each vessel approached, German artillery crews fired desperately, hoping to disrupt the assault. Yet the fire, no matter how precise, often fell short, hampered by smoke, mist, and the sheer number of targets. The defenses, once thought impenetrable, were straining under pressure. The first infantry units hit the beaches, and the cost was immediate and horrific. Sand and concrete exploded under naval bombardment. Shrapnel tore through defensive positions, and officers were forced to make split-second decisions that could mean life or death for hundreds of men. In many bunkers, soldiers froze under the combined weight of fear and confusion. The German chain of command faltered. Radio communications were jammed or destroyed by bombing, leaving units isolated and unaware of the broader tactical picture. Mistakes compounded rapidly. Troops sent to reinforce one sector arrived too late, only to be ambushed by paratroopers who had landed behind their lines. Mines and obstacles intended to slow the attackers were cleared by innovative Allied engineering units. Every defensive measure that had once inspired confidence now seemed insufficient against the overwhelming coordination of the Allied assault. For Karl Müller, it became painfully clear. The meticulous fortifications of the Atlantic Wall could not withstand this level of precision and scale. The psychological pressure on German officers was immense. Many had faced tough battles before, but nothing like this. Soldiers were dying not from heroism alone, but from the unstoppable momentum of a well-executed plan. panic began to ripple through ranks. Young conscripts trembled behind machine guns, veterans shouted futile orders, and officers like Müller realized that training and discipline could only carry them so far against a force that moved with the inevitability of a storm. The Allied deception campaigns worsened the confusion. Hitler and High Command, convinced that the main landing would occur at Pas de Calais, had held back reinforcements. Rommel's mobile divisions were stranded miles away, leaving the frontline garrisons to face the invasion with insufficient support. The German strategy, based on predictable responses to expected attacks, was collapsing under an operation designed to be anything but predictable. Karl observed the horror with a mixture of awe and dread. Landing craft swarmed the beaches, paratroopers cut off retreat paths, and the first mulberry harbors began to offload vehicles and supplies under fire. Every tactical decision the Germans attempted to implement seemed to be countered by Allied innovation. Standard defensive tactics, artillery barrages, fortified positions, and counterattacks were failing, revealing the limits of traditional military thinking when confronted by ingenuity and meticulous preparation. And yet, even as chaos engulfed the coastline, a spark of insight flickered among the Allied planners. They understood that sheer force alone could not guarantee success. Instead, it was the combination of deception, timing, and adaptation that was turning the tide. From the German perspective, nothing worked as expected. Old strategies were obsolete, and officers like Karl Müller were forced to witness history unfold, powerless to halt it. The stakes were clear. The Germans were trapped in a crisis of their own making. Every delay, misjudgment, and miscommunication amplified the overwhelming pressure from the Allied advance. The first day of D-Day would forever be remembered not just for bravery and bloodshed, but for the dramatic collapse of a strategy that had seemed invincible. The crisis was total, the outcome apparent, and the world was about to witness the unstoppable momentum of a meticulously executed invasion. As the morning fog lifted over Normandy, a subtle but decisive transformation began to unfold. While German officers scrambled, reacting to the chaos on the beaches, the Allies were implementing plans that went beyond brute force, plans born from months of innovation, observation, and daring improvisation. Every landing craft, every armored vehicle, every paratrooper was executing a tactic meticulously designed to bypass obstacles and outmaneuver the defenders. Central to this breakthrough were the engineers and strategists behind the specialized assault equipment, colloquially known as Hobart's funnies. These were not ordinary tanks. They were marvels of ingenuity, vehicles capable of clearing mines, crushing barbed wire, bridging rivers, and even launching small explosive charges to demolish bunkers. For the first time, warfare was not only about firepower, but about problem-solving in real time under enemy fire. The idea for these innovations did not come from generals in distant command centers, but from the minds of officers and engineers who had studied past amphibious assaults and learned from their failures. Brigadier Percy Hobart, a visionary armored commander, understood that traditional tanks and infantry would be decimated against the fortified Atlantic Wall. He proposed the development of machines that could adapt to any obstacle, a literal embodiment of creative thinking under pressure. On June 6th, as the first waves of Allied troops approached Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword Beaches, these ideas were put to the test. Crab tanks began rolling ahead, flailing and crushing mines with their rotating flails. Bridge-laying tanks spanned gaps in defensive ditches, allowing infantry and vehicles to surge forward without pause. Explosive-laden tanks demolished concrete bunkers, creating openings for soldiers who would otherwise have been pinned down. Each successful deployment sent shock waves through German ranks. From his vantage point atop the cliffs, Oberleutnant Karl Müller witnessed this transformation with a mix of disbelief and horror. The Germans had prepared for conventional attacks, waves of infantry, artillery barrages, and naval bombardments. They had not prepared for machines that could literally rewrite the rules of engagement in the middle of battle. Soldiers who had counted on the impenetrability of obstacles were suddenly vulnerable. Every defensive measure was being circumvented, and the momentum of the Allied advance accelerated with terrifying efficiency. Even more remarkable was the coordination between naval, air, and land forces. Bombers softened inland positions just as engineers cleared paths on the beaches. Paratroopers disrupted command and communication lines, preventing German reinforcements from mobilizing in time. The result was a seamless, dynamic system where innovation and timing became more powerful than sheer numbers alone. What had seemed impossible in theory was now unfolding in reality, right before the eyes of every German observer. The first successes were met with astonishment and fear. Karl Müller and his fellow officers realized that the Allies were not just attacking, they were thinking faster, adapting smarter, and using their ingenuity as a weapon. Bunkers that had seemed impregnable were breached within minutes. Landing zones that had been heavily fortified were suddenly open. And all the while, the Germans struggled to comprehend the logic behind the onslaught. Their predictable strategies rendered useless by sheer adaptive brilliance. This was the true breakthrough of D-Day. Victory did not come from overwhelming numbers alone. It came from the marriage of planning, innovation, and audacity. The Germans could see it unfolding, and they knew, with chilling clarity, that the tide could not be reversed. From that day forward, warfare would be forever changed, not merely by the force of arms, but by the imagination, foresight, and courage of those who dared to think differently, under fire. By the time the first beachheads were secured, the lesson was undeniable. Strategy without adaptability was obsolete, and creativity under pressure was a weapon as lethal as any cannon. The invasion had become unstoppable, and its success was as much a triumph of ingenuity as it was of force. By the afternoon of June 6, 1944, the Normandy coastline had transformed into a theater of both triumph and tragedy. The initial shock of the Allied assault had given way to a staggering display of tactical brilliance and human courage. Bunkers that once seemed impregnable lay in ruins, cleared by specialized tanks and relentless infantry. Engineers worked tirelessly to remove obstacles, while artillery units pressed forward to suppress remaining defensive positions. Each success, small or large, was a testament to the integration of innovation, preparation, and audacity. The Allies' meticulous planning had paid off, but the cost was heavy. Thousands of soldiers on both sides fell, trapped in a brutal struggle that tested the limits of endurance, training, and morale. At Omaha Beach, for example, American troops faced a concentrated storm of machine gun fire and artillery, losing hundreds before even establishing a foothold. Yet even in the face of such devastation, the the new tactics demonstrated their effectiveness. Landing zones once thought unreachable were captured, supply lines were secured, and armored units advanced to support infantry, preventing German counterattacks from gaining traction. The Germans, meanwhile, struggled to adapt. Observers like Oberleutnant Karl Müller watched as their carefully laid plans disintegrated. Mobile reserves intended to counter the landings were delayed or redirected due to confusion and miscommunication. Rommel's insights, while prescient, could not overcome the overwhelming coordination of Allied forces and the innovative tools at their disposal. Even when German soldiers attempted counterattacks, they found themselves outmaneuvered by tanks that bridged obstacles, paratroopers disrupting lines of retreat, and artillery synchronized with infantry movements. Lessons were hard-earned on both sides. For the Allies, D-Day proved that innovation in engineering and tactics could decisively shift the balance of power, even against formidable fortifications. The integration of deception, specialized machinery, and coordinated multi-branch assaults became a blueprint for modern warfare. For the Germans, the invasion highlighted the limits of rigid strategy, the vulnerability of fixed defenses, and the deadly consequences of underestimating an adaptable enemy. Individual acts of bravery punctuated the broader strategy. Soldiers who pressed forward under fire, engineers who risked their lives clearing mines, and officers who improvised solutions in real time turned tactical innovation into tangible victories. These moments underscored the human dimension of the operation. While machines and plans were critical, it was courage, adaptability, and leadership on the ground that truly determined outcomes. The day's operations also revealed errors and unforeseen consequences. Some landing zones faced delays due to rough seas or miscalculations in timing, causing units to become temporarily isolated. German counterattacks, when coordinated, inflicted significant casualties, reminding all that even the most successful strategy carries risk. Yet the overwhelming scale, coordination, and adaptability of the Allied plan ensured that these setbacks were temporary, unable to halt the momentum. By nightfall, Allied forces had secured critical beachheads, linking them into a continuous front that would allow reinforcements and supplies to pour in. The operation had changed the trajectory of the war in Western Europe, forcing Germany into a defensive posture that would continue for months. For German officers observing the devastation, the lesson was inescapable. The Allies' combination of meticulous planning, daring innovation, and relentless execution had created a force that could not be stopped by fortifications alone. D-Day was more than a battle. It was a turning point, a demonstration that ingenuity, courage, and coordination could overcome even the most formidable defenses. For historians, soldiers, and strategists alike, the day offered enduring insights into the evolution of warfare, the importance of adaptability, and the extraordinary capacity of human ingenuity to triumph over seemingly insurmountable obstacles. As the smoke of battle slowly lifted over Normandy, the human and strategic impact of D-Day became unmistakable. What began as an audacious plan, executed with unprecedented precision, had transformed the course of World War II. The beaches, once fortified with concrete and barbed wire, were now gateways to liberation. For the Allies, the operation was a resounding confirmation that courage, ingenuity, and meticulous planning could overcome even the most formidable defenses. Oberleutnant Karl Müller survived the day, But the memories of the armada he had witnessed, over 7,000 ships, coordinated air and ground forces, unstoppable momentum, haunted him. For officers like him, D-Day was not merely a military defeat, but a lesson in the limits of traditional strategy and the power of adaptive thinking. No matter the strength of fortifications or experience of soldiers, a combination of vision, coordination, and innovation could render the impossible possible. The operation's legacy extended beyond the immediate battlefield. Engineers and tacticians who had devised new equipment and approaches were forever celebrated for their ingenuity under fire. Tanks that could clear mines, bridge gaps, and demolish bunkers influenced post-war armored engineering. Paratrooper operations demonstrated the effectiveness of small, highly trained units striking deep behind enemy lines. The principles of deception, coordination, and adaptability became standard in military doctrine worldwide. Yet, beyond the strategic and technological legacy, D-Day offered a philosophical reflection on courage and human will. Every soldier who stepped onto those beaches faced a choice. Hesitation meant death, but action meant contributing to a larger purpose. Every officer who coordinated from observation posts had to confront uncertainty, balancing fear with duty. The invasion underscored a timeless truth. History is shaped not only by plans and machines, but by the courage to act when the stakes are unimaginably high. For Karl Müller and countless others who witnessed the invasion, the lesson was personal as well as professional. Human ingenuity and audacity could overcome even the most daunting obstacles, but the cost of inaction, hesitation, or miscalculation was dire. Victory on D-Day was forged in the intersection of preparation, improvisation, and unwavering resolve, a convergence that would echo through military history for generations. In the quiet aftermath, as the first Allied units secured key towns and supply lines, a deeper realization emerged. War, with all its chaos and destruction, was also a crucible for innovation, courage, and transformation. Those who dared to imagine a new approach, to challenge convention, and to act decisively under pressure, changed the world forever. And so, D-Day remains not just a story of strategic brilliance or numerical superiority. It is a testament to the power of human ingenuity and courage, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, innovation and bravery can carve a path through impossibility. The image of 7,000 ships advancing, unstoppable, against the cliffs of Normandy, lingers as a symbol of what can be achieved when vision, preparation, and daring converge, a lesson for soldiers, leaders, and humanity itself. As the sun set over the beaches, history had been written, and a single truth resounded across time. The courage to confront the impossible, combined with the will to innovate, can alter the destiny of nations.